7 minutes past. So Sana and I, have been designers and have been observing how things have been changing in the world around us, but especially in design. So we kind of talked about, hey, why don't we just put some these examples and show them and share them. And I'm sure we're just doing a very cursory glance on what has changed. And this is going to cover not just user experience design, but also experiential design, service design, and just how tech companies have adapted. So without further ado, so Ramla has given us a great introduction. I think we can probably skip this slide, but so that's Sana on the left and that's me on the right. I do work at Navy Federal Credit Union, been there for 6 years, and I really, really enjoy working there and a lot of good coworkers. Some are on the call. Sana, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I've been at Washingtonian for almost a year and a half now. It's a really great place to work, very dynamic office space, and adapting to this pandemic has certainly been a challenge, and it's been really, really interesting.
That's for sure. Cool. All right, just to get into it. So we wanted to cover just like I mentioned earlier, that design is not just, what you go on your phone or you go on the computer. It's not just digital, it's like everywhere around us. And that's called design theory, applying design methods to getting things done, for the lack of a better word. And I'm sure everyone here is more or less knows that. So why do we design though? We design in order for users to accomplish their tasks quickly, efficiently, and with a way to make them happy that they've done it right and they can move on with their lives. The thing with COVID is that a lot of companies, a lot of businesses had to be ready to adapt. Context changed, and then us as designers had to step up to the challenge and restructure while looking at if personas have changed, if journey maps have changed, and what other interruptions occurred where different work streams arose. 1 second. Cool. All right.
Right, and as Afreen mentioned a bit, a lot of these challenges are very much shared. As many of us know, a lot of us have had to stay indoors and be online for most of the day and adapt to very closed environments, usually in one space. And a lot of these new challenges are about limiting interaction and abiding by a different set of rules because of lockdown. And even on top of those things, we have been financially affected as well, both on a personal and on a worldwide level. And so we have to, in order to adapt to these common challenges, we really have to understand these sort of behavioral, psychological, and even temporal changes that have happened as a result of this pandemic. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see just some of the comparison. And this chart is actually drafted by Nielsen Norman, which some of you might know is a very prevalent user research group. Some of the challenges of before were, commuting every day to a physical office.
Different job.
I think someone's trying to get in. All right.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I'm gonna mute folks upon entry, so that shouldn't happen.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Ramla. But things like taking your kids to school or daycare, exercising in a physical gym, socializing in large groups at restaurants and bars, going to see the movies, buying products in a physical store, visiting a physical doctor's office. And then Afreen can talk a little bit more about, some of the challenges post-COVID.
Yes, for sure. And the changes we've seen is that people are not commuting anymore. They're starting to work from home. If people are commuting, they're trying to take more safer measures. People are now doing homeschooling, whether they'd like it or not, and they have to take care of their children almost 24/7 at home. Now people are changing to exercising at home, outdoors when the summer was really nice, or maybe not even at all. And those are big hurdles to overcome as in a community health standpoint. People are now socializing in small groups, indoors, and primarily outdoors, or if at all, some people just still have been quarantining since the beginning. People are starting to buy more products online. Definitely, people are seeing a rise in online orders and shipping delays and whatnot. People are ordering food to be delivered at home. They're ordering groceries to be delivered at home as well. Instead of going into these shared spaces, people are also now renting movies at home. I know that Disney has started to focus on being a stream first platform now than, Disney as we knew it. People are going on more local trips or doing staycations, and they're also going to visit their doctors through virtual means, through telehealth apps. And people, lastly, are starting to do more paperwork online, whether it be for DMV, any like renewals or what of the like. Sorry, one second. My slide won't go forward. There we go. Our first section that we want to cover is transportation. So I understand how people feel about going to the airport right now, but for some people that's still a necessity. And there are needs that have arisen that are different for people who are traveling very infrequently, people who travel maybe once every 5 months, to people who travel at least 5 times approximately in 1 month. And these different user groups have different needs, and they've identified different pain points in their travel plans, basically, when they're getting to an airport, to the gate, and into the airplane. So key thing for this aviation industry is just restoring traveler confidence. So one of the solutions is, hey, let's focus on making sure the end-to-end experience is very secure, safe, and quick. You still want to get to your flight as soon as you can, as safe as you can. So things that are being looked at are physical distancing, touchless technologies being used more, and generally more research into environmental monitoring. A really cool thing that Sana and I found was that those who are frequent travelers, heavy travelers, are focusing more on the safety of being within the airport. So during back check, security, and the gate area is where they'd like to see more implementation of safety measures rather than the flight as it is. Whereas infrequent travelers are worried more about the flight and the safety well-being on that flight. I thought that was pretty interesting. But as you can see, on average, you want to make as you enter an airport and as you step out of the destination airport, you want to be safe. So a few examples that we found was that internationally in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong International Airport, they conducted trials of using walk-in pods that would disinfect passenger skin and get rid of bacteria and viruses in approximately 40 seconds. So they used the sanitation pod, which I actually have an image later on, that will check temperature in order for you to enter the pod as it was. And then it would disinfect you, and then you can move forward. So within under a minute, you potentially are safer than when you first entered. In Amsterdam, and I will not pronounce this correctly, Amsterdam's airport, and in Aruba's Queen Beatrix International Airport, they're running a pilot program using biometrics that will capture your face when you first put your boarding pass, your passport image into this one machine. And from then on out, throughout the entire airport, under this trial, you would just use your face to check in and get to the gate and affirm that you are the traveler. So this has been just trials and experiments that are happening right now. This is just research that's being done. But many airports in general are also using sanitation methods that take away the human element. So they started using robots to decontaminate bathrooms and shared spaces. So I found a few awesome pictures. Before I get into that, this was a really nice infographic about the end-to-end safety measures that were occurring. So like I mentioned previously in the other examples in the Hong Kong airport, Aruba, and in I forgot. The other airport where they're doing biometric and face scanning. So now when you enter an airport, you're making sure that everyone's staying 6 feet away, and then trying to use as many touchless methods as possible using biometric screening. So you just need to affirm that you are the traveler first, for the first and only time. And then in general, you want to create spaces in boarding areas that are separate but still comfortable for passengers who are traveling. And then also decentralize the passenger processing. It doesn't need to be all collected in one spot for security or have multiple areas where there's security being conducted. So as I mentioned before, these are some of the methods of decontamination of shared spaces. They're just using these kinds of robots in different airports to help clean spaces. This is the pod I was talking about earlier, the Cleantech Pod. It looks really interesting in sci-fi, but it's being used right now. And lastly, this is an image of the airport where they would scan your face. What happens, I want to talk about this a little bit, is that you would take the image, your first picture when you first enter the airport, when you're doing back check and printing your ticket, if you were printing your ticket. And instead they take a facial scan. Then later on, there are cameras dispersed around the airport where it would take pictures where you would have had to provide a boarding pass. At the gate, you would take another facial scan, and that facial scan would be compared to the first few images that they had of you to make sure that this was in fact you. That was pretty interesting. Again, these are just still trial. They're still learning how to implement this in a wider sense. Next, I want to talk about commutes. People are working from home more, but public transportation is still very important, especially for people who need to work in certain sectors, especially those in healthcare. These are essential workers, and in urban areas, it's really difficult to have single person vehicles or commuting in a way that you're by yourself. So how do you ensure public health safety in a general sense? The solution to do this, it's actually a really big project as a whole, but there are small steps that are being taken around the world. So contactless methods of getting onto a bus, paying, these types of methods will help passengers, stay safe. And then also contract tracing data is being collected. So one of the biggest things is we need more research and information on how people are moving around, especially during this time, and how to make sure we can see where people are going, to see if you were infected with COVID or any other pandemic, other disease, like where could it have started? So with that, in New Zealand, the city of Auckland, they've allowed riders to know how many seats are available by letting them tap their key cards, and then to see if there are any seats available, if they need to wait to take another bus, if that one was full or just not safe enough to board. And other things that they have done is that instead of, it's become completely cashless. So you need to make sure that you have money on your card. And there are many ways to now do that as we're having more we have more methods of putting money into our cards. So for example, moving on, in Los Angeles, there is now a method where using one shared system called TAP, which is a reloadable contactless card. It's a single payment system that can be used in 25 different public transportation agencies that cover buses, trains, bikes, scooters, and other ride-sharing methods of transportation. So people can prepay ahead on their phones or go on to their TAP LA app and then add money so they could use wherever you go.
Oh, Afreen, to add to what Afreen said, you can also do this in the DC metro system now. The card is completely on your phone, and you can if you have an iPhone, you can keep it in your Apple Wallet. It's incredibly convenient.
I did not know that. That's really cool. Well, that's great because it's local. Everything we've been talking about has been countries away. Well, that's good. Okay, so this is an example of that tap card. And now you can see someone is just adding money to it here. All right. I want to go into healthcare. It's a very touchy subject. So I understand that there's still a lot to be learned in this industry for health, for design as a whole, and it will take a lot of time, but we need to implement things sooner rather than later. So as cases have surged virtually everywhere, we need to rapidly adjust and see how we can keep healthcare workers safe and quarantined, make sure or take more information on how to have more room for patients in the hospitals, and then keeping people who need to get regular checkups at the hospital safe away from those who are COVID positive. So some of the solutions that have arisen are some tech companies have actually lended their platform in order to keep these frontline workers safe. Telemedicine as a whole has risen across the country, and using previous information or data learned from the Ebola outbreak, for example, will help ensure how to move forward during COVID when things are really happening quickly. So on that note, Airbnb actually was able to use their platform and ask their hosts that they currently have, allowing these healthcare workers to have safer stays at no cost or very little cost, and so that they could work very close to their respective offices, so hospitals, outpatient areas, as well as keeping themselves quarantined away from their loved ones, so from their families or those that they lived with. Some other places, other measures that have been taken are they've created more negatively pressured spaces, which just means that at hospitals, people are now segregated. If you have been exposed to COVID, you are now going to stay in this section of the hospital that will only interact with COVID patients or areas that have been contaminated. And this is a way to rapidly keep the hospitals functional and allowing different people who need to do checkups, who are may have like other illnesses that need to remain at the hospital safe. And it's just a great way to keep things moving forward. And then the rise of telemedicine, actually things that have occurred in the past year for our country is that policy changes have allowed more practitioners talk to their patients as a whole, and it's risen significantly. And so those who are in rural areas have actually benefited, because previously where they had to drive long distances to get the care they needed, were now within a screen away to get the help they need. So patients who had acute, chronic, or primary, who needed this kind of help, they have more access to it now. And to add to that, chatbots have streamlined the process of helping people book appointments, connect patients with their doctors, and collect just more feedback from these patients. So now there is going to be a rise in telemedicine. There's going to be longer waiting times. So how do you combat that? You introduce chatbots, you introduce ways of automation. Cool. The next section is shopping and dining. I'll hand it over to Sana.
Yay. Okay, so let's talk about financing on the rise, or as I like to call it, layaway 2.0. So because a lot of people have, either lost income, or because they lost their jobs, or there have been other consequences of the economic downturn, like pay cuts, and businesses, on the other hand, have also had a lack of consumer consumption as well. A lot of financing plans like Klarna and Afterpay have been on the rise. And there's really three segments of users within this customer base. So the first segment consists of customers that have been able to remain employed and have generally kept the same amount of income, but because they're working from home, they're not going out as much, they're not, going and seeing their family for the holidays as often, for example. And so there's been a shift in spending to mostly essential items. And so a lot of that saved income has been redirected to pay off things like credit card debt and other unsecured loans. And the second customer segment within this group are people who have either been furloughed or seen like a very drastic decline in their income. And this segment has to keep an eye out on their leisure spending because a lot of their essential bills need to be covered and budgeted very diligently at this point. And so, you know, they need the leeway to be able to skip one or two credit card payments or loan payments. And that's where a lot of these financing plans can be really, really helpful. And then the third and final segment of the customer base are folks who have been unemployed directly as a result of the pandemic. And because of this, whether you're a business owner, whether you're working for a company, you're no longer working for that company, people have had to either file for bankruptcy or have been extremely financially challenged. And that's where these plans have been extremely helpful for people. If we go on to the next slide, we're going to talk about restaurant delivery services, which many of you, myself included, have been making a lot more use of because it's difficult to go out and eat out at restaurants at this point. But right, so with the advent of COVID-19, restaurants have had to offer more options for carry out and delivery rather than dining in. And so this is where apps like DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, and even luxury delivery services like Caviar really rose to the occasion to bridge the gap between providing small and large restaurants the ability to order easily and to adapt to a delivery-based food service. So how did they do this? One of the really simple solutions was that delivery apps added in the option for a service worker to just leave items at the door. If you see the image on the right, that is something I actually ordered and my Grubhub driver sent me a picture of after my order had been delivered. And you can see like the Uber Eats interface, there's a giant button and it's nice and contrasted against some of the other buttons on the interface when it's selected, so that you can leave items at the door. And so the reason that they did this was to minimize contact between the customer and a frontline worker, but in a very cost-effective way. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see an example with outdoor dining. So the problem is that over the summer, right, we've been able to do outdoor dining because the weather has been nice. But because now that the weather is getting colder, outdoor dining is a lot less accessible to people who still want to eat out and for restaurants who need to offer outdoor dining as part of their stream of revenue. And so a solution that a restaurant called Stable had was they built these chalets as a winter dining option to entertain guests while keeping them safe and socially distant from other customers, but in a very unique way. And if we go into the next slide, we can see that this design is, it's not only practical, but it's really appealing to the eye as well. And the way that Stable did this was that because Stable is a Swiss restaurant, they brought in Swiss culture. And what's more Swiss than a ski chalet in the winter? And it was also very cost effective as well because the restaurant owners had a friend who was also a woodcrafter. So they were able to build out these little nooks for people who were dining out. And the reason they did this was actually because one of the main items, if anyone's ever been to Stable, is fondue and raclette, and both of those dishes are made of melted cheese, which don't really work well for takeout or for delivery because the cheese would solidify by the time a customer got it. So they really needed outdoor dining to stay an option even during the winter. And now we're going to talk a little bit about media, which is my wheelhouse, because that is the industry I work in. But I work at the Washingtonian, and one of the major challenges we had when the pandemic started was how we were going to handle language and accessibility for content, particularly related to COVID. So because the news had been changing constantly, we really had to be careful with how we phrase things and make sure the content was as accessible as possible. And so the way that we did this was that we increased our user engagement for breaking news about COVID through our use of social media, as well as creating a COVID archive on our homepage so that the content was easily accessible. And you can see this a bit on the next slide. So in our trending topics area, we have a section we have a little button just for our complete coronavirus coverage. It's updated at this point hourly with news and content related to the virus. And that was like a very simple UI update. We really just created a tag on the homepage and linked it to the archive. And another thing that we did with social media was use the hashtag breaking on platforms like Twitter for very time sensitive news. And the reason we did this, as mentioned before, was just to make our reporting much more easily accessible. And a social media platform like Twitter that a lot of people already use and we already have a really big following on is a really accessible way to digest information very, very quickly. And then I'm going to hand it back to Afreen to talk about hospitality.
Right. So if you guys can hear me again, I muted. Another thing that we came across were that at hotels, people still need a place to stay if they're all so socially distancing or need to quarantine away from their loved ones. So the need for hotels has plummeted, but we still need these spaces to adapt to this new environment. So how could some of the measures be taken to ensure this safety? So communal spaces like a gym or like the cafeteria area are no longer usable. How did these hotels now adapt? So some of the things that have changed are that one hotel chain, Mint House, they started giving each guest an in-room mirror system. So instead of having a gym that everyone used, now you would be working out in your own hotel room where, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this, the mirror system, but it is a mirror and also has a screen behind it that has like a shows different types of workouts you can do. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then this is being implemented in more of these hotels that Mint has. It's been implemented in like 2 or 3 in other countries, and it's become such a popular item that they're introducing it elsewhere. And other lower occupancy hotels like Mandarin Oriental, which is in DC, they started converting some unused hotel rooms adjacent to the ones where people are staying in into their own private gyms. So instead of 1 room, you get 2 rooms. It's just kind of cool. And then some smaller, very small places that are like inns, like for example, historic Smithton Inn, which is 257 years old. They don't have people staying any longer. So instead they pivoted. They do not make as much money, but they are selling items that they had in their stock. So they'll sell any alcohol that they have, or branded sheets, candles, soaps, and just other items to kind of give people a luxurious staycation if they wanted to at home safely. Some other online travel agencies, and for example, this is a good one. It's a case study that I found. Despigar, it's a leading online travel company in Latin America. They've restructured their website to adapt to having different needs presented by people who are traveling or who are considering traveling. So what they've done is they've really pushed other designers to just do more research, because through their research, they found that people who before the pandemic, flexible bookings were very uncommon and they're generally more expensive. But now, because of uncertainty of situations and potentially getting exposed and not knowing if they can travel or not, flexibility of their bookings is skyrocketed, and people want that ability, want to have that safeguard no matter what. Especially since in March, I'm sure people who were traveling knew how difficult it was to cancel their bookings. So this has become something worldwide now. They found that there are new user groups that have emerged. There are people who are more risk tolerant and those who are more risk adverse. So that was interesting from the research that they did. Another thing that was interesting is that they did A/B testing on their images, where they showed images of the rooms being sanitized, so more intimate spaces where you would just stay with the people that you're staying with or by yourself, and also showed images of shared spaces, so like the lobbies. And interestingly enough, they've seen that those intimate, smaller, the room images did not do well, and instead the rooms or the shared spaces like lobbies, if people were dressed up in their proper PPE, they actually responded better to those images. They just didn't want a reminder of what COVID did to their lives. So that was interesting that I found. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's why research is so important. So some of the key takeaways that we had found is that across these different industries, there have been behavioral shifts, psychological shifts, the changes in user groups. Different countries and different areas have different responses. And they're also like temporal effects. So all of these things are something to consider when you're designing or when you're thinking of how to adjust the world around you so that it's safer. And that concludes our little talk. There's still a lot to explore. This is just, again, a very cursory glance at what of the different changes have been made the world around us. So I think we have time for questions. These are the resources that we used.
Great, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. I love the use of a bunch of real world examples, especially that hotel one. I think that was really interesting. I have a quick question.
Sure.
I'll jump in, and then if folks want to just go ahead and speak up, they can ask questions, and then we'll also go through the chat. But I wanted to ask, I'm curious, in the research that you did you find out any information about the types of people that were making these changes? Like, did you find that organizations were hiring like experienced designers or like teams to kind of think of these solutions? Were they coming up with them themselves? I'm just curious about like the people behind kind of the choices that were being made and the people coming up with these new experiences, if you could speak on that.
So I've noticed more in the research that we did that there may have been people hired to kind of adapt to these new environments, but usually it's just designers themselves doing their own research, doing more testing, and then working with their teams to adjust to the new normal. So UX team leads, I noticed, were the ones who were doing more of the work. But I'm sure that there have been changes more lately in the year than there were previously, where everybody had to kind of figure it out by themselves. So that's the best way I can answer that.
Cool. And just to kind of go through the chat, I saw that Carl had a few questions. The first one was, how has management adapted to remote work? I've had first-hand experience where it was an issue before COVID. Do you want to expand more on that question, Carl? Or
Oh, yes, as a matter of fact. I mean, some of the projects I'm working with, I mean, you may have a top shelf web agency, for example, and they're fully remote teams. It's like even on some of my volunteer and organizational work, I deal with a technical architect that's based out on the West Coast. The thing is, even on some projects I've been on, though, we had old school managers, and it's sort of like this out of sight, out of mind thing. It doesn't matter if you're one of the most productive people in the industry. If they don't see you direct physically, they don't think it happens.
Right. I've experienced this in different contexts with different companies. And the best I can answer this is that it just takes time for these more traditional environments to adapt to working from home and having trust in their employees to actually do the work that they've been doing. So I think it's hard for me to answer that question because I am not at that level. But it is something that is a slow process. But I think this entire situation has pushed or forced these leaders to take a second glance. Sada, I think you wanted to say something.
Oh, yes. So to answer your question, Carl, I think something that a lot of really, in my opinion, good managers have done during this time, and you know, in addition to my day job, I have a few like volunteer organizations that I'm part of as well, is that I think a really good manager during this time has been taking the time to really establish a good relationship and rapport with their coworkers. Like something that my boss does that I love is he'll do like a weekly mental health check-in, just see where everyone's at mentally, so that it doesn't just feel like that, you know, people working under you or with you, you're not just like a deliverable to them. You know, these are people. And I think that during this time, especially because we are, you know, working together apart, those personal relationships are extremely important to making sure that a remote team can work well together.
Thank you.
No problem. And then I think, Carl, you had another question about how are organizations dealing with the Kafka-esque challenges existing before COVID. Yeah, I think I like your use of the word Kafkaesque. I'm a fan. I think because we're in this situation where we're all sort of forced to work remotely and digitally, it has really accelerated a lot of those. When you're talking about some of the examples you gave with like the MBA, I was thinking in particular about the election, where because we're all forced to be apart, people really had to take in more mail-in ballots, you know, at the election polls. And that, you know, that process had to be streamlined because that was how a lot of people were voting during this election. And I think that's a good example of just how this pandemic has forced people to sort of progress a lot faster than they might have in a normal circumstance.
That's a really good point, actually, Sana. Voting in itself is such a big, wicked problem, but I think this pandemic or mail-in voting has actually changed the face of the way people are now going to vote in the future. I think we had a few other questions, or I think
William Lawrence asked, so by accessibility, y'all mean providing access to the design and content, not specifically ensuring accessibility of the design and content to people with disabilities. Yeah. I was talking about accessibility in terms of just keeping access equal to everyone across the board. Although it's funny you mentioned that. That is kind of one of my next bigger research projects, is just accessibility in terms of folks with disabilities.
Cool, thank you. I think if there are no more questions, I think that really wraps up what we wanted to share with you all.
Awesome. If folks had other questions that they didn't put in the chat, they're free to kind of chime in now. Give folks a second.
It looks like you got a question from Kamal.
Oh, Are there any changes in designs that you guys have identified that you see as more temporary versus some that you see as long-term or permanent shifts? I think as a whole, throughout this entire presentation, I think what I've noticed is that we need to pay more attention to our research and that we need to invest in it more. Because if we don't see how our user groups are changing, like who you are now designing for could have changed in the past 5 years, past month. These are such changing times that I'm only going to see this in the future as well. So I think that's one of the key things that I identified, but they're also concerned that once the vaccine is out and then people are going to go back to their old normal, will things change back to what we used to be like? And that's something a lot of designers have been trying to figure out or just anticipate. And so I'm actually keeping an eye out on that as well. And I can't really answer that at the moment, but we just have to wait and see.
And I have one more question just to go back to what Carl was talking about and what you guys were saying about having remote workers. How do you guys feel about the software that's been produced for keeping, essentially spying, but it is supposed to keep an eye on workers on their computers? It will take screenshots every couple of hours. It'll track keyboard strokes. It'll track mouse movement and report back to managers. Do you guys think that that's an effective solution? Do you think that that causes too much stress on employees? Or do you think that if it was done seamlessly, is that a good solution and would be fine?
I could not answer that question because, I mean, I have my own opinions, but I can't really answer that question.
I know Sana said basically just, you know, have good rapport with your team. You know, there's a lot of other ways that you can communicate about it.
Right.
But I didn't know if you guys were thinking somewhat in a similar fashion of just basically streamlining it. And that way it takes the stress out of both from the manager's perspective of now I have to check in and potentially waste my team's time with meetings. And I can just see, you know, have they been productive? I'll take an average. Yes, they might have been a little more productive one day and a little less the next day, but there's no real reason to browbeat them over it, you know?
Right. I think one of the key things that I also saw when I was reading on different UX methods is just to be kinder to your team. So kind of stayed away from research orienting and the work from home environment, more of like what's happening around us after hours. Yep. However, to answer that question, I think in general, we need to be, again, more aware, more sympathetic to the changing environments and context of our workers as a whole as well. You don't know what their home life is like. You don't know if their connection is the same. So if you're checking in every hour or whatever time, you know, it's just, you're not going to find that information you're looking for if you're just spying on your employees. Like that's just not a good working environment as a whole.
Yeah, I think Carl just commented that it's very 1984. Carl,
Yes.
I really like your literary references today.
Thank you. I try.
Don't worry, Big Brother promises it's only for the best.
Yeah, I just think that it feels, and I have a very strong opinion on this, so apologies if this offends anyone. I just feel like that's like fear mongering your coworkers and the people who work under you, and it just kind of creates a rift in the relationship almost. I think I like the idea of automating, like checking in where people are at on tasks, but like I don't think it has to be done in such a like just very
authoritarian way.
Authoritarian, feels like
Yep.
your FBI agent is like looking over your shoulder kind of way. So I think there's potentially a balance there, but I don't love it. I don't think it's a good way long term, especially for the mental health of the people who work remotely. Work under that kind of pressure.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just add, there are ways to combat this, but really it's a larger cultural thing that, you know, within a job that you should run for the hills if stuff like that is happening. But you probably already had if an employer was to do something like that, there's probably been other things that, you know, are cringeworthy as well.
You know. Well, that's not good news, because maybe I should be leaving my employer then.
Oh, geez.
Well, John, you know, on Amazon, there's a little device that you can set up where it'll click on your trackpad and make
that's true.
Look like you're busy. I actually know someone who has used this and taken work to the Caribbean and whatnot, pre-pandemic. So.
Yeah, I knew people doing that pre-pandemic too, where they had like something set up that it would like it would move the trackpad on their mouse every like on top of the hour or so that it looked like they were still online on like what does the government use, like Skype for Business or what have you.
Yeah.
Just get your cat to do it instead.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Well, maybe that's a good segue to who's hiring right now, and also you know, what are you hiring for? You know, where do you work? And also, are there any job seekers out there? And what type of jobs are you looking for?
Yeah. Unfortunately, because I don't work in design, that's going to be. But yeah, I mean, and it is difficult, especially as you're saying right now too, with just the general question of who's going to even hire at this moment, right? With all these things being automated and a lot of things changing, it's going to be a lot harder for employers to go through normal training routines and get people acclimated.
Right.
All right, so I know we're close towards the end. I just want to thank Sana and Afreen again so much for your presentation. I got a lot out of it, and it's also recorded. I knew folks had to drop off early, so we'll be sending it around. A few housekeeping notes. If anyone is interested in speaking, we're always looking for refresh speakers. You can talk about anything that you're really passionate about. It can be design related, coding, development, strategic, you know, anything that's kind of tech related. We're always open to kind of hearing different perspectives. Also, I know like Nick did a quick job shout out towards the end, but you know, we're always looking to help folks out. I know there's a lot going on in this pandemic. So if you ever have a job posting, we're always happy to kind of retweet it for you and promote it on our page. So you can always send that out to us as well. And yeah, unless anyone else has any other announcements, I think we'll conclude. But thank you again, Afreen and Sana, for the amazing presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just wanted to say that, you know, thank you guys for attending. It was really interesting to share this information with everybody. So if we find anything else, definitely we'll try to do another one of these.
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe both of Sana and Afreen's Twitter handles and LinkedIn's are on the page, so you can reach out to them there. If you want their emails, we can also get you in touch with them as well. So thank you all so much. And yeah, Soha just did a little shout out. She said she works at the American Society for Microbiology. They're looking for an email specialist. So yeah, I'll actually save this chat links in case anyone needs to access any of the links, but great. Thank you all so much.
Bye. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Go get them. Have a good time.